Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Brendan McLaughlin.
Hi, Brendan. I'm Mike Broad.
I'm Beth Stern.
And I'm Sonny Kopetsky.
All right, Beth, what's the scenario?
All right, Brennan. This week we have a question we received a few months ago. Today's Insured that we're discussing decided to jump into the latest trend that a lot of suburban homeowners are doing, and they're deciding to get chickens. So he built a chicken coop and a large caged-in area for the chickens to be able to safely, walk around, but have fencing over them. The coop itself looks like a really big shed that you might buy a kit for, like at Home Depot or Menards or something. But they actually constructed it and built this large shed-looking coop, and then they also had this large fenced-in area as well. The insured calls up their agent to ask if there's coverage for the coop under their HO0003 policy. They have the newest 2022 edition. And they wanted to see, they have this coverage for their home right now and a detached garage, but they wanted to know if this would also cover the chicken coop.
All right. This is going to be,
Brendan, I thought we were going to go with a pickleball once. Just sweeping suburbia, I wasn't going chicken coop. So yeah,
we'll have to do that next month. We'll figure something out. Yeah. But first, I wanted to try out a new kind of icebreaker. We've got our trivia. We've got a couple different things. I put a soapbox here. I'm going to call it, we need to talk about this because we need to talk about, apparently chickens are dinosaurs. I did not realize this, but apparently just dinosaurs are not fully extinct because technically birds are just dinosaurs.
Yeah, I think chickens are basically pterodactyls.
Wow.
I remember seeing something that said that today's chicken is the closest in DNA to a T-Rex, I believe. It was T-Rex, the one with the little arms, right? Yeah, I think that's what...
I mean, also velociraptors, but...
Yeah. So I think DNA-wise, chickens are the closest.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. And, I mean, you can have dinosaurs for pets. I mean... And it just, it makes it feel a little more real, that these creatures roam the earth. It's really interesting.
Wait a minute, time out. What do you mean this is really interesting? Like you're saying like it's a fact. And then, I mean, what's the basis of this here? Chickens or dinosaurs? Dinosaurs are dinosaurs.
I would call it a factoid because I'm kind of reporting it, very secondhand. But I think I read the word theropod or something like that. It's a
thing you take for
I use some bigger words. It's apparently their phylogenetic classification. Like they're just within the family tree of the dinosaurs. But apparently the tree never, the fact that they're descendants, you could call them dinosaurs. Apparently you're entitled to that. Whatever the scientists who figure these things out said, you can go ahead and call them a dinosaur. And I'm taking that to heart.
This Wikipedia research, Brendan, or is this published study somewhere that we can look up? Exactly.
Yeah. We're not going to check my sources too closely on this.
All right. And when we see Nashville hot dinosaurs, we'll know that's really chicken.
All right, so we're talking about this coop that this person built. So that's a pretty interesting question when you talk about coverage. What type of coverage do you even start with here?
Well, that's a good question because from what this question that came to us came with zero details whatsoever. Just we have a chicken coop, how is it covered? And it's going to vary depending on what kind of chicken coop you have and what, how you're going to insure this. I did some research trying to look into chicken coops and how they're built and that type of thing. And it's amazing how they can vary. There are chicken coops that are just like kind of little boxes that they nest in, and then that's it, So that's probably not really a structure. So the question is this going to be covered under coverage A, coverage B, or coverage C of your policy? And that's going to depend a lot on the way the coop was constructed, how it was built. So basically, I'd say starting with coverage A, it's unlikely that coverage A covers your dwelling and attached structures. So unless this chicken coop is literally physically attached to your dwelling, it's probably not going to fit under coverage A. And so I think that's kind of a given that we're going to really be down to the question of, is this come under coverage B of your policy, or is this come under coverage C? So you want to talk a little bit about coverage B and what that provides coverage for?
Well, can I just ask, so if you have the side of your house and you kind of create the coop off of that and just a real rough structure, is that enough? If you're just nailing it into your house, is that enough, you think? Fall under A?
It's possible. It's possible, yes. That makes me think, so at my house, we have on the side of the dwelling, we have actually a shed that's actually built in as part of the side of our house, because we're not allowed to have attached sheds. So something like that. Yeah. If you attached it and maybe the roof comes off the side of your house, maybe you could have coverage A if you constructed this attached to your dwelling. So the key is it's the dwelling and structures that are attached. Once you get any space between the dwelling and this structure that you've constructed, that's usually moving into coverage B. So I'll go into coverage B. We cover other structures on the residence premises set apart from the dwelling by clear space. In other words, usually there is a break between the actual dwelling and where the coverage B other structure would begin. So that's the one possibility. The other possibility is this is actually going to remain personal property, and it's really not. It's not really been constructed. So a lot depends on what kind of. When somebody just says we have a chicken coop, you have to really delve a little further than just saying, "Oh, okay, all chicken coops are this or that," because that's not going to be the case. There's a lot of questions you need to ask to kind of get into the bones of how these would be covered.
And one of the things that we often will look towards is how affixed it is, right? So the question I always ask when it comes to this coverage B or C is, can you take it with you if you move?
And that's right, Sonia. Like one of the big factors that courts will look at, or when we're doing our coverage analysis, will be the method. How is it affixed to the land? There's some factors that have really been considered to decide whether something's coverage B and coverage C. But before I get there, maybe I should also go back. I didn't really mention the policy covers coverage C, which is your personal property anywhere in the world. So the chicken coop could be located somewhere else. If you call it personal property, I could take these chickens over to my sister's house, and the coop, I could take this little box or whatever it is. If it remains personal property, I could have coverage somewhere else besides at the premises. But coverage B covers other structures at the residence premises, and the residence premises is a defined term, and that's going to depend on what it says in your policy declarations. So normally, other structures are only going to be covered if they appear right at your house. Okay, so there are some factors that we would consider when we're trying to decide, mostly between coverage B and coverage C. And those are going to be, as Sonia mentioned, has it been affixed to the realty? So in other words, this chicken coop might, maybe they just built a small little thing and they didn't really put it into the ground and they didn't affix it really into the realty. So is that going to be coverage B? Most times, probably not, but a lot of it does have to do, there's kind of three factors that have been courts have looked at. Number one, the method and how it's been affixed. Is it something that's attached, easily removed, or is this something that you mean to dig into the ground and you want it to stay there? Another factor is going to be, how you use it. What is the adaptation for, the purpose of this property and how you're using it. But then the third thing, as Sonia was starting to mention, was that a lot of it has to do with the intent of the party. If somebody says, oh, I'm going to take this chicken coop with me if I move, well, then it probably remains personal property. But it's going to depend on each time. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I'm presented with a claim of, and if somebody just says chicken coop, you need to get further into the discussion to see how that's covered.
I'm picturing two scenarios in my mind here. I'm picturing a really light chicken coop that with some little weak tent stakes in the ground. And I'm picturing a really heavy, large wooden structure with nothing in the ground. And I would say that based on this, even though it's technically got stuff in the ground, the first one with the really light stakes might be considered personal property, whereas the really heavy one, even though there's nothing in the ground, you would never want to move that. It's so heavy. That might fall under B. So
Yeah.
I could see how it could get complicated here.
Yeah. And just when I was answering this particular question, I did quite a bit of, I just Googling around and looking around, and I saw, gosh, there's so many different kinds. Some people make these chicken coops that are like the size of a house, like with all these different, ways, for the chickens to come in and come out. And then the other thing was sometimes these fenced areas that it's almost just a portable area for the chickens to move around if you want to move them to fresh grass or whatever, you kind of have just this fenced thing that surrounds the chickens, and you can actually have it on wheels and move it almost
like a playpen.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it reminds me of. Yeah, your chicken playpen. And so then they get fresh grass if whatever they want, fresh area for them. So, and another thing I read about was that some of these, they purposely don't affix them to the ground for a number of reasons. One could be, let's just say if you're in a place where maybe water runs through, or if it rains, you get to a buildup of water or something like that. Obviously, you don't want your chickens to drown. So maybe you wouldn't affix it then. Even if you have more substantial structure, maybe you're not affixing it. Or the other thing I read was that a lot of the construction of these is dependent on you're trying to keep predators out. So there's always foxes or coyotes or even dogs, whatever, trying to get into these people's chicken coops and get the chickens. So a lot of it, sometimes the things I read said you actually don't affix it to the ground to try to keep out these predators, but some said you should. So there's all kinds of different things. And so these can be anything, as I said, a little box on the ground to some giant building that you've really constructed. So I think I wouldn't generalize whether they could be coverage B or coverage C, because each time, I think this is a case where every single time it's going to be little different factors that you need to consider.
Best legal answer is always, it depends.
Exactly.
Depends.
And we got that one here.
I wanted to say about those, I know in the city of Chicago, this is a thing, but I'm sure these municipalities have city ordinances, and they may themselves talk about how they can and can't be affixed. That might be helpful when looking into whether or not it's coverage A or B. I don't, not entirely sure. It also reminded me, how you can have those huge swing sets, those wooden swing sets you can put in a backyard like as kids, and they're enormous, right? And they're so big, you wouldn't think to take it with you. But my sister and brother-in-law actually just went and bought one, and they took the whole thing down, and, and so then that's coverage C. Like that mobility and that intent makes it coverage C, but maybe at a time of loss, I would have thought it to be coverage B. So I think, it just depends.
Yeah, and that's a good point, that it tells you that all of these things have to be treated on an individual basis. There's no one size fits all solution for how you're going to consider coverage for these particular types of things that can be structures but can remain personal property. Same goes for, if you have an above ground pool, or you have these swing sets, all these kind of things. Same kind of factors go into consideration for these.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the work of an adjuster to figure out how the facts fit into the policy. But what's different from a swimming pool or swing set is these chickens are producing eggs. So my question is, if you have all these chickens and you put a sign out and you start selling this, does that impact coverage?
Well, that's a good point, Brennan. So it could be. I mean, your typical backyard chicken owner probably isn't trying to have this run as a business, or they probably don't have a profit motive. But if they start producing a lot of eggs that are excess, instead of wasting them, maybe they will start selling them. So then you are going to have some kind of cutoff. Some of the newer policies will define like how much exactly you can make before it's considered a business. And that's a whole nother thing where you have to consider the factors that go into whether something's a business or is a hobby. Have you crossed that line? Most of these people are kind of hobby chicken owners, I think, but you never know. Yeah, you might cross the line. If you get to the point where, you're motivated by a profit, you think, oh, this is real easy. I love having these chickens and I want to, make a little money at it. Maybe. Yeah. And then you start a baking business because you have all these extra eggs. Then you start, who knows, right?
All right. We got to get some branding. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so I didn't get to my point there, I guess, is that if you do get into the realm of that, this could cross over into a business, but then you do have things to consider. Coverage B, other structures used in whole or in part for business can be something that could make it property not covered under your homeowner's policy. So people who use their garages for different kinds of businesses, you do have to start considering. And this is something where the language of this business wording has changed very much over the last few editions of most homeowner policies. So you really do have to check into your particular policy language. But yeah, that could become a factor for that reason. Yep.
If you're raising dinos, you really got to think before you start selling stuff, and especially at scale. All right, but let's head into our takeaways.
Yeah, there are a few takeaways here. Another thing I didn't really mention about why is it important to know whether it's coverage B or coverage C? Well, that is going to matter in any kind of coverage analysis. Okay, you procure coverage, then if it's coverage C and this is just personal property, then you have to have a named peril. So depending on what happens to your chicken coop, I think what mostly happens probably is windstorm or, that kind of thing, that would be covered under a named peril policy. But you have to remember that if it's coverage C, then you have to have a named peril. And then the other thing that is going to make a difference is that it'll depend on the loss settlement provisions depend, coverage B structures that are buildings. If you have a kind of elaborate chicken coop you could call a building, that would be covered on a replacement cost basis. But if it's a structure that's not a building or personal property, that would be covered at ACV. So it is going to make a difference. Every time you might have a claim about, B or C property, that's why it's going to matter. Yeah. So I guess your takeaways would be look at all the factors that you're going to have to consider. Number one, how is this thing constructed? Is it something that's really been built? Has it been affixed to the realty? How is the insured considering it? Like, is their intention when they put this thing together to take it with them if they move, or is this such a big elaborate thing that they're gonna, sell their house and leave it there? Those are factors to be considered, and then that's going to affect your coverage as far as if you have named peril or open peril coverage. Coverage A and B is open perils, named peril for coverage C. And then it's also going to depend on how the loss settlement is going to be handled. Coverage C is only ACV. If it's a building, it could be replacement costs. So those are other things to consider. One other thing I didn't mention that I was kind of thinking of is the thing about coverage B is if it only structures on the residence premises are covered. So this comes up a lot of times if we see somebody has a well across the street, or if they have a boat dock across the street, maybe this insured owns the piece of property across the street. And if they really build some elaborate chicken coop that would be a structure, your homeowner's policy only covers structures on the residence premises. So if that's a different piece of property, you're not going to have coverage if it's a structure. Now, personal property is covered worldwide, but if it's a structure and you've really made that attached and affixed to the building, to the realty, you might have to consider that you're not going to have coverage as another structure across the street.
So at this point, normally I would ask Mike, where can an adjuster go to learn more? I think we lost Mike though. I'm gonna say he
The
chickened out.
dinosaurs got him.
Yeah,
The
those
dinosaurs.
velociraptors. I think his internet's down, but I'll just say for him that you can head over to plrb.org. We've got some fantastic coverage annotations looking at coverage A, B, C, and D. And I think we'll list some other ones there as well. And normally at this point, Mike would ask, Brennan, can we share those links in the show notes? And I would say yes. And there you'll also find a recap of the key points from this episode and links to our social media. Don't forget to subscribe and rate us. And please give us a call at 630-509-8704 and leave a voicemail to share your adjuster story. We'll see you next time. The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.